So, Anthony, take us back to 1974. It's Christmas Eve. You're a 12-year-old kid. What were you doing?
I was 12-year-old. Just finished primary school, Milner Primary School at that stage. So I was pretty excited, going to be turning 13. High school was the next school I'd be going to. So a lot of things happening then. So Christmas was a pretty traditional thing for us at that time. A lot of other exciting things about to happen in the new year. So that's where we were. We're located in Wanguri at the time. So, yeah, that's where it all happened for us.
So Christmas Eve,
yep,
1974, probably waiting to have a nice Christmas lunch, I presume. What were your thoughts? What was the feeling like for you and your family as Cyclone Tracy was approaching? Were you worried? Were you concerned?
Well, we had, I think, Cyclone Thelma past Darwin about a couple of weeks beforehand. We had a pretty large earthquake too, which evacuated the whole school at the time. But Selma just turned into a bit of a no-show, a lot of rain, not much wind. So when Cyclone Tracy was on the horizon, there wasn't any sort of real concern. Everybody was focused on Christmas, celebrations, all that sort of stuff. I can't think of a moment at that time where anybody, even my own parents, showed any concern that the Tracy was looming off the coast of the Tiwi Islands.
When did you realise something serious was happening?
Well, for me, it all got pretty serious at about 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night. Rain had been pretty consistent. The wind had picked up through the course of the evening. By 10 o'clock, I'd gone to bed. Now, what woke me up was, at that time, was no air conditioners back in those days. Didn't know what they were. So I had my bedroom window open, my bedroom door closed, and I woke up to just a loud sound of wind. And at that stage, with the first stages of the house starting to shake, and I thought, this is pretty weird. And I actually got out of my bed, walked out of my bedroom and into my parents' bedroom. And at that particular stage, this is 10:30, 11 by then, I remember my bedroom door just slamming shut. Both my parents were sitting up in bed listening to old transistor radio. That's how it was back in those days. And the slamming of my door was that loud. It shook the whole house, the whole reverberation. So Dad and myself went back to my bedroom, which is a few meters down the corridor, and we couldn't open the door. We just couldn't open the bedroom door. But behind the door, you could hear the sound of things being disintegrated, like a gorilla had gone crazy in there. And that was the beginning of the house starting to break up, unbeknown to us at the time. The things happened very, very quickly thereafter. I remember my sister, like wide-eyed. She was probably 5 or 6 at the time. My mum was up. Dad was starting to think about what to do. Where do we go from here? I remember the power went out, and that was it. The house is shaking, the power's out. And we had one of those old, well, back then it was new, the old yellow dolphin torches. So Dad said, come on, son, we'll go down to the kitchen and look out the window and see what's happening outside. And I climbed up onto the sink. He shone the light out, and that sort of yellow light beam flashed across the backyard. And we had a large gum tree. Probably wasn't that large, but it was large to me as a kid. And I remember as that light hit that tree, the tree just fell over and smashed right across the neighbour's house. And Dad that was it. He said, right, we've got to get out of here. And went back in, got everybody together in the laundry, and then upstairs in the corridor of the house. And by this stage, the house was really starting to shake. Where you're really feeling like unsteady on your feet. And Dad decided at the moment's notice, he said, we've got to get to downstairs. We had a downstairs toilet and an old laundry, which was typical of elevated houses in those days. And, of course, unbeknown to me, the downstairs toilet was locked because I had a brand new push bike in there. And they didn't want me going there through the course of the school holidays, so that always kept locked. And Dad goes, the key, you got to get the key to downstairs. And I had to go back into the kitchen. So this is pitch black, house is shaking, and I knew exactly what you walked around the corner to your left, and the glass cabinet there where all the china was, and the key used to be just in the little glass sliding door. Grab it, I came out. But as I grabbed it, turned around, that bottom end of the kitchen just exploded out. It just disappeared. and all I could see was the flash of lightning and just bits of debris going everywhere. And I didn't have time to really comprehend what was going on. Your mind was getting into a sensory overload because everything you're seeing you've never experienced before in your life. But you still had that. You still knew what you had to do. And I rushed back and I said, "Dad, the house is breaking up." We all ran to the front of the house. Remember, we've got no power, just that old dolphin torch light. And at the front door, and the front of the house was a big veranda. We all sat there, and Dad shone the torch up to see what was left, and you could see the veranda just peeling away. Everything was just going like you couldn't actually follow the bits of the gyprock or whatever it was, the cladding that was holding the ceiling. It was just disappeared in a nanosecond. And Dad told my mum and my sister, he said, "Grab her, get her downstairs as quick as you can." He said, "I'll come down with me." They quickly scurried down the stairs. Dad used to have a vice-like hand anyway. He grabbed me by the hand, and as we took one step, we just disappeared. Something just picked us up off the floor, off the stairs, and before we knew it, we're on the lawn 5-10 meters away from the veranda. Without even thinking twice, though, you're back on your feet again because you know things are getting bad, and we just had to get to that room. And I remember Dad had just bought a brand new Renault TS16. He loved the Renault. And as we ran past it, I noticed the torch beam. There was a big dent in the back of his car. And I thought, absolutely no way. This is going to be an absolute crap Christmas day because he's got and that one just destroyed him. Anyway, we got in there and we were looking after, Mum was a principal of a school back then. She had another school friend that left their 2 dogs with us. A large dog, a very large dog, and a small, I think a dachshund or something like that. So we all managed to get into this tiny little cubicle, 900 wide by maybe 6 foot long, toilet at one end. We all clambered in. There was no bike, but that's another story. Mum sat on the toilet. I sat on the floor beside her on her left. My sister and father sat over here, and that's where we hunkered in. And that was the beginning of the night for us. Insofar as what we experienced, well, it's really, really hard to, unless you actually go through something like that, bear in mind, I saw it through the eyes of a 12-year-old at the stage. So I saw my parents panicking. Well, I wouldn't say panicking as in losing control, but at 12, you see your parents as being able to get you through anything. And I could see my father's eyes. I could see my mother's eyes. I could see we're in really, really bad place now. It's something I've never, ever seen before. And I'd been through war in Africa as a child a few years before that. So I saw things that a lot of people hadn't. But this particular time, it really, really made it absolutely clear what was going on, that we were in real trouble. You lose track of time, but I remember the crashing and the sounds of things exploding around you. And all we're in this concrete coffin, I'd like to call it, Besser block type coffin. And we just had straight floorboards above us. And you could see the floorboards start disappearing. And then before you knew it, you were getting absolutely drenched in rain. You'd look up and you'd see flashes of lightning. You'd see bits of debris starting to stick through the roof. And it was absolutely relentless for hours and hours and hours. And I remember, I can't tell you what time it was, but it was a good while into it, and things were getting more and more dire in this toilet room, because the debris was getting closer and closer to us as the top of the house collapsed in on itself and other debris joined in with it. But I remember Mum said, well, she didn't say it, she just started praying. We're not really a religious family. I mean, I was brought up like a lot of Anglo-Saxon families were, there was a little bit of religion involved in things, but she just started praying. And I thought, I don't know what to do, I just thought, this is the first time in my life I actually thought of what death could look like. This is what it's going to be like. My dad just held my sister as tight as he could. Everybody was just bent over, and I also remember the 2 dogs we had. They were just, when dogs get really spooked, their tails go under between their legs, and they were urinating and defecating everywhere. And we were doing the same thing we were definitely urinating, because Mum said we were freezing cold in there. Mum said, just wear your pants, just wear in your pants, you'll feel warm for a few seconds. So we did, everybody did. The stench in that little area was the least of our worries. And, these scenarios just replayed, different things happened. You could hear crashing against the walls. And I remember at some stage that we had above Mum's head, there were little tiny toilet windows. I don't know how it was tiny. And it just got sucked out, disappeared. And that became, in the morning, the only place that one of us could get out of to try and free the rest of the family. As the night progressed into the early hours of the morning, we began to hear, I thought we were the only people alive. No way anybody else could survive this. I mean, the screaming sound, we mentioned about the sound of at the museum. You go into that booth there, it's dark, and you hear that sound. Magnify that by 200 or 300 times. You can't hear, for me to talk to each other, we'd have to scream at each other. And even then, we'd probably be losing our words. So that's the sort of intensity of the sound, and the conjunction with things slamming against the building above us, the rain, the lightning. And the sound of the wind. That was another thing. It was just, I can't really put words to it unless you go through that. And it never, ever, ever leaves you. That sound. It's the sound. And it was relentless, and just kept on going and going. And we kept getting further and further lower to the ground as it all happened. By about 5 o'clock, I reckon it was, we could hear the sound of a car horn behind us. And it was just intermittent, beep, 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 and it would hold on for 10 seconds, and immediately you knew someone out there. The only reason you go to your car horn was someone was in trouble. But it was just, we couldn't even get out of where we were, let alone, try and give help. But we knew it was plainly obvious that someone was in really bad shape. This went on for probably an hour. And it was only later that morning, 10 o'clock or so that morning, after the people had got out of the debris, we found out that family had lost their young child. The mother and daughter, or mother and child, had been crushed in a wall, and the dad couldn't do anything to get this wall off. He was racing to the car to try and appeal to someone to try and come, but no one could come. That was one of the, that hit hard. Again, that was another just reminder of, at that age, death was real. First time for me. That was it, By about 6, the wind had calmed. When I say calmed down, it was probably around that 100k mark, just under 100 k's. It was still that ghostly grey outside. The rain was still coming down, but it was enough where you felt like you could get out of here and try and do something, And Dad said, get out there, get out through that. Oh, that's right. He tried to open the door. The door was jammed shut. And he said, son, you've got to go through that window. And I remember he pushed me up onto the cistern of the toilet, and he sort of pushed me through, and I just stopped. And he said, get out, come on, open that door. I said, Dad, there's nothing left. He goes, what do you mean there's nothing left? He said, but bullshit, he goes. There's nothing. I said, Dad, there's nothing out here. It's gone. Everything's gone. He said, just open the bloody door. He just didn't believe what I'd said. And I was just on, I don't know, I was absorbing this, like the morning, that night before, there was Christmas trees up, everybody was playing around, we're running around on our push bikes, people were all happy, everything was green. And you look out and you've got a completely different world in front of you, just twisted wreckage, carnage everywhere. As far as the eye could see, I could not see a single house that was standing where we were. In fact, out from that window, I could see right across where Tiwi is today, out to Casuarina Beach. And all you could just see is these trees that are just completely stripped of their leaves. Couldn't recognize a house. The whole thing was surreal. Anyway, I got out, came down a bit of timber that was beside the house, got to the side of the door, and there was a bit of timber that was jamming across the door. But the whole side of that house had sort of crumbled across the side of that door. I managed to open up about 12 inches, and everybody came out. And it's that moment in time where everybody else saw what I saw. Mum and Dad didn't say a thing. We just, as if by, it was the only sort of time I've lost in memory as to how we got from that place to the front of our driveway. And it took us probably 10 minutes to do so because we were climbing over everything, debris, wreckage, everything. We got to the front of our gate. I mean, there was no road per se. It was just building material, twisted steel, rubble, unidentifiable bits of rubbish. And I was in bare feet. Mum and Dad, I think, had shoes, and Mum was carrying my sister. And we thought we've got to get to Wanguri Primary School. That was Wanguri Primary was still under construction, but it was a concrete shell. And as we came out, you could see across the other side of the park and all around us, just these bodies just emerging out of the heavy rain and mist. It's like zombies just rising out of and it was just almost on cue, just people started coming out of their whatever shelter, whatever they happened to be hiding under during that storm. And everybody just came across. No one spoke to each other. We just all collated, just walked into Wanguri Primary School. And people just put themselves up against the wall. I remember seeing some horrific injuries, absolutely horrific injuries. And people fussing around trying to help those that are injured. People were trying to organise things. My sister and I were just shell-shocked. Dad just put us up against the wall with Mum. Dad went off with a couple of other blokes trying to organise a few things, and probably within an hour and a half, there were already leaders starting to stand up in that group. You know, that people stood up and said, right, here we are, this is what we've got. We've got to do this, and this, get some fresh water, get some, clothing, material. We've got people that have to be medically helped. Find as much food as you can, and all that sort of stuff. There was already a system in place within a couple of hours where, that survival was kicking in, getting things organised, stopping the panic, getting people treated, keeping the kids calm. And, and fires were started in the middle of the room. They got these, in those days, we didn't have plastic rubbish bins, all the old steel rubbish bins, that were around, and there was a whole bunch of them in the school for whatever reasons. And they became filled, they were filled with water, stuff they were boiled up to treat the wounded, fresh drinking water. Others were, they got us kids, and there were tins of food, anything you could find out around the school that was edible. Generally, it was tin food that we were all asked to get, was collected, opened up, and put into that one big rubbish bin. And there were a few other rubbish bins going for different things. So, and by lunchtime, another person stood up. I reckon he was in military, but there was this word go around that there were other survivors in Alloa, and that we should set up a posse to go and see if we could find them. My dad was ex-army himself, so he and about 8 other men took off in a westerly direction towards Casuarina High School, and they came back about 4 hours later with about 15 people. So we up until that stage, we thought we're the only people alive in Darwin. You didn't have any mobile phones, no contact, no radio, nothing. So you put yourself in that position. You've got no outside contact. You've got to make do with what you could. And that was the essence of that 12, 14 hours. And we just hit the ground running from that stage onwards. It was action stations from the moment we got out of that debris till I think I was evacuated on the 29th. There was always things to be done.
Can I just take you back to the moment you're on that staircase? It's you and your dad, and the cyclone literally picks you up and throws you away.
It just picked us up as if we were on the moon, if that makes sense. There was no gravity. So you didn't feel like anything grabbed you. You were just suspended in air, and then for whatever reasons you were, and just landed on the lawn. And that was probably from here to the lawn out the front here, 5 to 10 meters. Never explained. I mean, Dad and I, till he passed, we often talked about that. What was, how did it happen? How did that possibly happen? But it did. I've spoken to other people who had similar experiences. These things, you're left with more questions than you ever will get answers for.
What's going through your mind? Like, 50 years on, what's going through your mind when a cyclone is literally picking you up and throwing you 10 meters across your own property?
50 years ago, as a 12-year-old, there was no comprehending it. Now, today, it gives me goosebumps. My experience today is completely different to my experience back then. I know, for example, now as a parent and a grandparent, the enormous responsibility thousands of parents should have had looking after their children or their grandparents or whomever they may have been responsible for. I cannot imagine what would have gone through their minds and how they dealt with it as they did. So you have two completely lived experiences with Cyclone Tracy. One as an adult, time after, when you've had time to sort of think about it, and at your time then, during the storm. During the storm, it was just chaotic. You were just going from one trauma to the next. You were just jumping from live or die, go here, go there. There is no plans. The cyclone, Tracy it was at night time, no lights, nowhere to go. You're trapped. Wherever you happen to get yourself to, and that's where you've decided to stay, if you had the opportunity to move elsewhere, that's it. You've got to make the best of that, and you've got to deal with that as you can at that moment in time. And that's the thing as a child you can't comprehend. And it's only as we've all got older now, we've all reconnected with each other, we're all sort of having similar sort of flashbacks. I know, for example, for me, I've withheld a lot of things, and I've had experiences later in years gone by which has sort of brought that back for me. But I can safely say that most of us would have just put those memories in the filing cabinet somewhere deep down the back of your memory. And every time a cyclone comes or something like that comes about, that's when everybody starts, you get a bit edgy about things because you don't know how to deal with it. Because that's what happened when you're completely and utterly at the mercy of that storm.
Did you, in subsequent years, did you talk much to your parents about that night? And if so, what did they tell you about their experience? Because I imagine for them, it must have been just beyond traumatic.
Yeah, well, we did. And the thing about, let me say this, when people suffer traumatic experiences as an individual, it's completely different to when you suffer a traumatic experience as a collective group of people. I'll take, for example, the people that would have gone through the Holocaust. They knew what each of them went through because they all lived that experience. It would have been horrific. So they could share things, and I could talk to you about it, and they would know what that other person was talking about. Very similar with Cyclone Tracy. There are enough of us around who you could talk to, and they'd say, I know about it. You don't have to convince me. So it became a little bit easier to manage. But insofar as my parents, they very rarely raised it. They were a much older generation where you didn't relive those things unless it was just a conversation for the sake of a conversation, and it was pretty generalized. But I know my mother suffered traumatically for years afterwards because she stayed in Darwin up until the 1990s. And every time we had a large storm come through, she would put on a set of earmuffs. She'd go into the bedroom, put the doonas over her, whatever she could just to escape a normal storm coming across. So they suffered, and they continued to suffer till the day they died. And I think it was because of that responsibility they had to endure. They never spoke. It was just something they felt they had to do that was bestowed upon them. They had to make sure their children were safe, and they did that job with absolute admiration. I can't thank them enough for it.
When we were talking off camera before, you used the analogy of a car accident. If you're in a car accident, it's over before you even know what's happening.
Correct. Yep.
You're dead or you're injured or whatever.
Yep.
But this experience for you and your family, you're in there for...
from 10:30 till about 6. So talking 14 hours. Sorry, 8 hours.
8 hours.
Yep.
For 8 hours, you're there thinking there is a real possibility that I could die at it.
At that time, that became an absolute clear realization, and it was just ongoing. You know, the stress or the anxiety, that there was no way of relieving it. It's not like, as you said, something happens, you break your leg, you have trauma, you realize what's happened, and you move forward. This is just like, it just goes on. It's relentless, and it goes on, and nothing ever gets any better. Just different things are thrown into the recipe, I suppose, of what you have to deal with. And I don't know how we survived. I still, to this day, every time I talk about it, the first thing is I say, and I hear this ad nauseum. People say, I don't know how we survived. We should have died. You know, the flimsy sort of structures that people manage to hide in, or just by pure freak of nature, you know, a massive beam or something landed beside them or took that part of the house that not them. But we've got to remember that, you know, at least 66 people didn't make it that night. And I think that's the thing, you know, and we all feel like in some way that we should have been part of that, I suppose. It doesn't make sense that people survived like they did. I don't know if I'll ever come to terms with it. It's not something you can sit there and try and analyze. And I've never really spoken to anybody about it, you know, like professionally, but there are enough people I can speak to who've been through these things where we can sort of, you can share the experience and know that, as I said, you can talk to someone and they know exactly what I'm talking about. I don't have to try and convince that person of what it was like that night, because I know and they know exactly how bad it was.
Do you think, I mean, these days, if a cyclone like Tracy hit Darwin tomorrow, there'd be God knows how many counsellors would be brought up here, and everyone would go through, would get professional help.
Yep.
You know, that obviously didn't happen in 1974.
Oh, not at all.
But do you think your life would have been different if Cyclone Tracy if you hadn't have experienced Cyclone Tracy?
Yeah, I do. How do I measure that? I don't know. I just know it's had a profound impact on me in some way or another. Now, whether it's given me resilience, whether it's weakened my resolve or my ability to deal with conflicts or matters of high anxiety, I've never really been tested on that. But I have to say that you have to walk away from these things saying we were resilient as a group of people. We hit the ground running, whether that's right or wrong, whether, you know, months of counselling would have changed who we were, I don't know. But I just know that we stood up, we got on with the job, we went back. I got heavily involved in the construction of Darwin when I became old enough to work, and we just went about it. And that generation of people carried that momentum to the next generation. So we had a fury of development for 20 years in Darwin. No one even had time to even talk about it. I can't think of a time when the media sat back and thought, let's start talking to some of these people about it. We just pushed on. Now, I'm 60 now, I'll be 63 shortly. Has it changed me? Yeah, of course it's changed me. No doubt about it. But I think it's given me resilience. But I also think it's, there's things about that cyclone that absolutely destroyed me from within, and I still carry that today. But like many people, that gets put in the back. And I'm hoping this 50 years, you know, a lot of people are going to be coming together. We're going to be reuniting with a lot of people, and hopefully a lot of that will be sort of laid to rest. I think that's going to be a massive step forward for a lot of people to move forward. You know, we've done our bit. We got into it, put our shoulder to the wall, I suppose, as they say, rolled the sleeves up. And now it's time to kick back and have a few beers and say everything's going to be all right.
Take us back to Christmas Day, because that's where we sort of got chronologically on this journey. You're at Wanguru Primary School.
Yep.
You think that you're possibly the only people who are still alive in Darwin.
Yep.
How then do you and everyone else who's there go about working out what's going on, getting help, and eventually getting out of Darwin?
Well, the first thing is right there and then, as we all entered that room, there was people organising. That community engagement kicked in immediately. Darwin was like that back then. You'd go anywhere down the road and as a kid, you'd go, "Can I get a glass of water?" They'd just give it to you. There was very strong community spirit going on. So from the moment that we all started getting things into that big, it's now the library of Wanguri Primary School, things were starting to get organised. People being treated. The whole thing, I wouldn't say moved smoothly, but it was organised. People stepped up and people moved along with it, there wasn't a time that I could think that anybody started arguing. Everybody got involved cooperatively. And I don't know whether we'd have that the same today.
What sort of injuries were you seeing?
I remember seeing a compound fracture of a leg of a young lady beside me. A lot of people had pretty serious gashes, which they'd wrapped up with old shirts and stuff. So head injuries. A lot of people came in with towels wrapped around parts of their body. I mean, it's as a child, you get a little bit curious, you get a little bit morbid, I suppose, that you do want to have a look. But after a couple, I just couldn't look anymore. And the organisation was somehow we had to get these people to help. Now, I wasn't a part of that, but behind the scenes, people were working out how to get these people cared for. And within probably a day or so, I remember people coming and taking those people away. And we, for the first time, probably 24, 36 hours later, we got first contact with the outside world. I knew we were going to be okay. I remember seeing a Hercules fly over Wanguri Primary School, like just above treetop height. And on each side of the wings was just a solid mist coming out. They were just disinfecting the whole of the suburbs because all the food was rotting everywhere. There were a lot of things going on, and there was all the rumours going around that Cyclone had turned around, it was going to come back, and and it's not like now you get on Facebook and say anybody got information about such and such. These things were just popping up, and you had to deal with it.
Yeah, because you're in a city with no communication, no water, no electricity.
Yep, no food, whatever you could say. So that's how it was. You put yourself
like Survivor Darwin.
Except on steroids, because you're in an environment where you can't say, I'm tapping out of here, I've had enough now. Day 4, that's it, I've had enough. You just have to stick it out. And whatever, I think that was another thing about being at that age then. Kids were pretty independent as far as we used to go out from home for the whole day. Just before the lights came on around the suburbs, you'd be home. You knew how to look after yourself. You'd find a little creek. We used to go down a little creek down the back of Buffalo Creek there, have a drink of water and all that sort of stuff. That was the thing that I think made the big difference. People just knew how to get things done collectively. And I worried that today we might not have that sort of engagement. That's going to be a really good test, because I know with Marcus, as we've discussed before, people struggled without mobile phone reception for a while. So take away water, food, shelter. In the middle of the wet season, no fans, no air conditioning, and you're a whole world of pain.
And arguably a community that is not as close or as together as it was in 1970.
That's definitely the case. I mean, you still got that old Darwin. It's still there. But I think it would take something perhaps like Tracy to test us out, just to see what our resolve is like as a community. And I like to believe that we would do that as a community, as citizens of Darwin. But, that being said, I never want to go through that again. I'd never want anybody else to go through that again. It was, it was a surreal moment in time that has gone down in history, and I don't know if it'll ever be set to be repeated. And your heart goes out for all the people in Florida and whoever else gets affected by these storms. That's another time when it all comes back to you. You share that time. Christmas is another time. I don't think I've gone through a single Christmas in 50 years where I don't think about that. So that's the sort of impact and effect it's had on us.
Where did you stay? Where did you sleep for the 3 or 4 days after the cyclone?
So fortunately, even though the school was a shell of a school, they were getting ready to insulate the ceilings before cladding the top part of the roof. So there was probably 50 rolls of roofing insulation, probably highly dangerous if you measured it by today's standards. But everybody got a roll, just grabbed a roll, you cut it up, and that became your mattress for 3 or 4 days. And whatever bedding, so I don't remember having any bedding at all, but I was pretty exhausted. And you would just sleep on that. That was what we had. So you made do with whatever you could. You could just wander out of that building, and you'll find maybe some old bedding, some old clothes, some this, some that, and that's whatever you could use. Bits of timber for the fire, utensils that were around we used to eat or cook with. It was back to square one, like an apocalyptic event. And you just, whatever nature's thrown at you, start with that.
And food-wise?
Same. I remember they gave us kids all tasks. They said to us, go and find any tin can you could find. I'm sure we picked up cans of dog food and stuff like that, but everything that we brought back, they just had an old-fashioned tin opener, and the women just emptied these tins, and they sort of three-quarter filled those steel rubbish bins, galvanized steel rubbish bins with whatever they found. I remember there was baked beer. Everybody had tins of something back in those days. And everybody got a dishing of that. And I can tell you, by lunchtime the next day, I was starving. So I smashed. And I remember saying, I'm going to tell my mum, I said, I'm going to go get some more. She said, don't you dare, that's rude. And I didn't, I played football. But yeah, that's what we ate. And that just, the next day we did the same thing. Next day, I remember one of the days someone found an old leg of, the leg of ham from, and they were iffy about cutting it up. But I think it went into the big stew and just cooked long enough to kill any bacteria. But yeah, that's the sort of way you went. We were collecting water. Water dripped off the roof. We found puddles of water, and it was all put into these big drums, rubbish bins. Fires were constantly going. Another one with boiling water with rags in it to treat the wounded, bedding, that sort of stuff. So you're starting from scratch. Absolute scratch. If people were in there for the whole time I was there with no shirt on their back, just a pair of stubbies on or something like
that. And when and how did you eventually get out of there?
I just got word. Dad said, you're getting out today. That was it. It was like, how? I remember we jumped in the back of a ute. Just an old, well, it would have been a new ute back in those days, and there was no such thing as laws against getting in the back of a ute. So I think about 10 of us got in the back of a ute. Went all down to where the old airport used to be, where Shell Airport Gates is on, Winnelly there. Drove in there, and there were just lines of cars coming in, people in the back of utes and trucks and all sorts of stuff just coming in with people. And we came into the big hangar there, and someone said, do you have any family in Australia? We said, no. And they said, where do you want to go? I said, wherever you're happy to send us. And they said, right, we'll send you off to Perth. So we just did our basic filling in the documentation. And all our stuff's recorded on the logbook now, which is circulating around the place. Our names are in there, the date we're evacuated. And we just sat in a hangar for 3 or 4 hours with a group of people. And they said, right, you guys are all going. And we had to walk, I don't know, it seemed like forever. Peak. About 1 o'clock in the afternoon, stinking hot, just a long line of people, just in the clothes you had. I still had my pajamas on, if I remember rightly, or pajama pants on, and the T-shirt Dad had found. Mum had my sister in her arms, and Dad hugged us, kissed Mum goodbye. And that's another thing, you think, okay, so where am I going? Like you're 12 years old, you're just getting on a plane going. Dad's been left behind, family's broken up. We jump on a plane. It was an ANSET or TAA, and I remember the corridors were filled with people. You're just in like one per seat, that's it. There were people up and down the corridor, no luggage, I presume. No one had any luggage. So, and as we took off and the plane banked banked to the left over the northern suburbs, I remember going to the window, people just because you could see aerial view of Darwin there. And then it became, oh my God, this is what, Darwin was gone. It was gone. It's just not your street or your suburb or your area. It was the whole of Darwin. It was gone. And I remember I used to hate getting needles. I missed the first. Everybody had to get needles for all sorts of things. But when we landed in Derby, I think it is in WA, as soon as we were off the airport, off the plane, there was a whole bunch of nurses to give you psychopped a couple more dead. And then we just arrived in Perth just on sunset that same day. And I remember it was like the Rolling Stones that arrived, except no one was there excited. They were just there to support. They just knew that survivors were coming in from Darwin, and they were going to be there to show their support. And there were just hundreds of people, all around the airport, just waving banners and all that sort of stuff. And they moved us off into a big hangar. And in that hangar were the Salvation Army and a whole lot of other non-for-profits, government NGOs. And there were just these long tables as far as you could see. And they said, right, how many have you got in the family? Mum would say, 3 of us. Said, right, here's a, crockery. You had a basket on a trolley or something like that. And everything you needed just to get you going for that week was put into there. And then right at the very end, they had people there who were prepared to billet you. All right, who wants to take this family? So it was like that. And so we went to a place called Kellerberrin, about 200 or 300 kilometres in the wheat belt, east of Perth.
Where a family had just agreed out of the goodness of their heart to
just
take you
like
in.
that. And that's another thing you get to realise, that's what, I'm sure that would be the case today, but that was the spirit. That was the generosity. And before we know it, we're in the car in Land Rover, people we'd never met before, taking us to a place we'd never been before for an undetermined length of time. And, but again, you think about it as a 12-year-old, I've come from the cyclone. I start the new year like a week, 2 weeks later, and I'm going to a new tight rural community school of Kellerberrin where every kid grew up with every one of them. And this little kid comes. Just literal blowing from down. Yeah. So everybody just you just get pumped with questions and everyone wants to know everything about you. Anyway, for whatever reasons, the reason was Mum got a job for a short period of time back in Perth. So then we moved back to Perth and I went to City Beach High School. Same deal again, but in a bit bigger environment. And we stayed there for 6 months. I think Dad visited us once in that time.
Well, take us back to when you're leaving, and you've got to say you've just been through this life-altering traumatic experience.
Yep.
With your dad, and then you're at the airport, and you've got to say goodbye. And more to the point, he's got to say goodbye.
Yep.
What's that?
Pretty emotional, because we've been together as a family solidly through a massive ordeal. And now we're being broken apart. And I remember Mum was really upset. She was in tears. And Mum's a pretty tough woman. But they understood things a little more than I did, I suppose, and definitely more than my sister. So they knew, we might never be going back to our home. Dad had no idea how long he was going to be in Darwin for. What was the future for the family? There was no planning or time to prepare for those things. You were just gone. And so, but again, my parents were pretty tough. They did what had to be done to get through the situation, and everything else was internalized for them. They just did it because they had to, and that was the way they saw it. It was tough though. Mum showed it. Mum definitely showed it. I'm sure Dad did, but he just would never ever let anybody know about that. He always said to me, "Never show your emotions, son." And he was like that to the day he died.
Did you think, as you're flying out, looking out the window at a city that's just been completely destroyed, did you think that Darwin would be rebuilt?
Well, you did wonder what if you were going to come back. You couldn't imagine it being rebuilt. There's no way. That was a concept too hard to understand. That how you destroyed this, how could it possibly be brought back again? I think the fact that all the men stayed up there in Darwin was evidence that there was going to be something positive happening. And I know the talk between Mum and Dad, whenever they had a chance to get on the phone, because they used to go to Darwin High School, the men, and there was a phone there. They used to use that phone to call. It was like a prison, you know. You'd get your Wednesday afternoon between 3 and 3:15. You could call out for the fair. And Dad said they're rebuilding. It's all happening. We're going hammer and tongs. Darwin's getting. So that was the first time it became a realization I was going to go back, which I was pretty excited about. I didn't know what I was going to expect though. And when I came back, things were 6 months later, but things were pretty badly messed up. We moved into a house in the city. There was about 4 families living with us, some people under tarps. We had a trawler. A guy named Frenchie had a fleet of trawlers, and he used to park up in Darwin. That was his base. And there was a time when Darwin got delivered a shipload of VVs. I don't know if you've heard the story. But the Victorian Bitter Brewery decided to gift Darwin this whole shipload. But no one paid the tax. Apparently there was a tax imposed on all that much grog coming to Darwin. No one would pay the tax, so they had to be collectively dumped. So it all went out to the dump or pushed over the side of the harbour. But in the meantime, when everybody knew it was getting dumped, everybody had a ute in Darwin.
I bet they did.
And Frenchie, he had an F100. I remember I remember coming around the corner one day. We were in Malabar Street in the city, and he barely turned the front of that F100 around the corner. He had so many cartons of. Anyway, they got so sick of beer. They used to trade the beer out at sea with all the Queensland prawning guys for prawns. So yeah, they were funny stories. But again, everybody just stuck together. It was just, we're getting together. We're all collectively moving towards that goal, and it just happened. You know, before you know it, Darwin just got into this place it is today.
Amazing. And when you look back now, obviously you rode a roller coaster of emotion.
Yeah.
During that time. But I mean, what's the emotion
that sticks out for you 50 years on?
50 years on? I think the emotions now are probably a lot stronger now because you've had 50 years to think about it in your own way. I think about my parents, what they had to deal through. I think about what we went through. I think about what everybody else went through. And you sort of, you kind of just stack things on top of each other. I know it's had a lot more impact on me this time around, the 50th anniversary, because we're the last generation. I couldn't believe it. We're the last generation of survivors now. Like saying the last generation of people who fought in World War II. We're it. So if I feel like we have an obligation, a responsibility to let people in Darwin know about Cyclone Tracy in the most educational and respectful way we possibly can. I think that's bestowed upon us. That's an added burden on us. Well, for me it is anyway, but it's also, you're constantly reliving things. We're getting together now, so people are talking about it a lot more. I'm hoping, for me, I'm going to try and close a few doors this Christmas Day. I'm going to look at it in a slightly more positive way. I mean, there's a lot of positives for me anyway, but been a lot of things that I haven't been able to reconcile, and I'm absolutely hoping that's going to happen. That's why I think this commemorative event on Christmas Day is going to be so important to so many people.
Need to educate people about what happened in Cyclone Tracy. Do you think, living here now, because it's been so long since we had a cyclone that was that serious, do you think we've become complacent?
100%. 100%. I see it all the time. You know, as we've mentioned before, a cyclone warning will start appearing, and people will grab pizzas and get down to the beach with a six-pack. Some people grab their surfboards. Some people want to go somewhere just to observe it. If you look back, and if you go back, cut back a few layers, a lot of those people who went through Cyclone Tracy, they're loading up their car. They're loading up their possessions. They're doing the complete opposite. And that's the disconnect that 50 years of effectively nothing. We've had Marcus, and I think we had one a few years before that. Of course, we had a lot of trees went down, but we didn't have any sort of injuries or deaths or widespread damage. And that's a long, long time. 50 years, people get extremely complacent. I think another thing people get complacent about is we believe that our building codes are going to save us. And I don't think that's the case. You know, you get a car, everybody's got a car, a trailer, a boat, wheelie bins. Every garden's got 100% more gardening material that they had back in Cyclone Tracy. They're all missiles. And it doesn't matter how well your house is constructed. You get a lighter car today in a 800 kilo Mazda 3 going through a side of a house at 300 kilometers an hour. It's going to obliterate that home. And when that home obliterates, it gets the next one. And people don't think about things like that. And that's what we've got to, that's the importance on the message of Cyclone Tracy as to what the power of nature can do. And it's got to be a constant reminder, not one that we fear, but one that we know how to deal with when the time comes.